Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Also, a reminder for everybody for the 4 p.m. meetings, please park on either Morningside or Fairford. And go right to the approval of the agenda. Have a motion to approve the agenda?
So moved.
Can I have a second?
Second.
All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. And we could jump right into the policy revisions to Policy Administrative Guideline 5.14 with Dr. Bishop.
Perfect, thank you so much. The policy we're talking about is Board Policy 5.14 and also Administrative Guideline 5.14. And this is one of the documents that we lean heavily on when it comes to our staffing throughout the teaching process. And this is one document that I have been working on with the union for multiple years, just talking about how we do business when it relates to teachers, especially when they're getting unfortunately reduced or we're having to make different staffing changes. So I'm going to have Mr. Kava go through it in a second with greater detail, but there are a couple of things in here that are not changing. And the things that are changing in here are some things that have to change based on the para laws that are changing, that are shifting. So based upon the new legislation that we had, some of the para law changes that went into effect, I believe, in 2012, have now been signed and are going back to a certain standard in which they were before. They were prohibited subjects to bargaining before, and now some of those things have been taken out. So some of the things that are in this document are automatically going to happen, and so we're being proactive within that. But essentially the document is saying that when we look at teacher staffing and assignments, we're really looking at a teacher's performance in the classroom, and that's something that we're truly focusing on. It will not change if the teacher has, if let's say, for instance, a teacher at Brownell, for instance, there's not an English class for her to be able to teach there, but there is one at Richard, no, sorry, not Richard, it's elementary school, but let's say it's at Pierce. She still will have the opportunity to go there if there is a class that is available there for her to be able to teach. So those things aren't changing. There was just a point system that was in here before that we are no longer doing, and I've been working with the teacher unit on it, on taking that out, so we can have a more holistic view when we're doing our staffing conversations as a district. But I'll have Mr. Kava go into greater detail as far as line by line, but overall we feel like this is a great policy for us to look at holistically. How do we best support our students and our teachers in the district?
All right, Mr. Kava.
Yes. So with respect to the policy and the administrative guideline, a couple of things to note. So Dr. Bishop mentioned the Public Employment Relations Act amendments. And so just a quick overview in history. 2011, there were multiple items that became prohibited topics of bargaining in 2011. And many of those related to teachers specifically. And those big ones that are related to teachers were teacher evaluation, layoff and recall, teacher placement, teacher discipline, and another one that it's not talked about as much as merit pay as well. So those items came out of collective bargaining agreements with those units that had historically been mandatory topics. And over time, school districts created board policies or administrative regulations related to those topics, including Grosse Pointe. As we now enter bargaining in this year, 2024, all of those items that were prohibited, the ones I just mentioned, are now becoming mandatory topics again. So they haven't been mandatory since 2011. Now starting in 2024, February 13th of 2024, they will be mandatory topics of bargaining, meaning we will have to, inevitably the teachers union will request to bargain those topics. They're already starting to discuss those with Dr. Bishop, and we will have to bargain those. So what our law firm and what all law firms that practice in education law across the state are recommending to school districts is make sure your admin guidelines are reviewed and updated if needed to ensure that if you're in the process of bargaining and you don't reach an agreement by the time you either have teacher placement, layoff and recall, or evaluations, that you have guidelines in place which are going to be called the status quo, meaning that will be the baseline of what is able to be done until a collective bargaining agreement is reached. So that's the purpose why there was a review of your board policies and administrative guidelines. When our office was asked to review them, it was asked from a manner of Dr. Bishop has already spoken with the teachers union, as he stated. There's some concerns that they had that they wanted to have discussed, which we did discuss and address. So I think it makes it more friendly for the teachers' organization overall. And then we were asked to do a baseline review of the teacher placement and layoff and recall policies and admin guidelines to essentially make sure that we just made proposed amendments that complied with the law, because there's been some updates not only to those items becoming mandatory topics of bargaining, but the law regarding teacher evaluation and teacher placement and layoff and recall has been amended. So that's what we did. We made some minor edits with respect to ensuring that you're in compliance with the law. Otherwise, in general, you have in place policies and administrative guidelines that provide the district the ability to place teachers as a right of assignment, essentially. And then there's some factors that go into that, mainly based on the effectiveness ratings of teachers based on their evaluations. So their performance in the classroom. So that was the general overall overview of what we did. So go through in some detail on what we did. So the first page has your board policy 5.14. And board policies in general are going to be shorter in nature than the admin guidelines gives more detail of the policies. So what we did was take out references to tenured teachers here in the policy itself. And so this will apply to all teachers. And anyone who is a teacher as defined in the Teachers Tenure Act or the Revised School Code will have their personnel decisions made in a manner that provides a priority, if you will, based on their effectiveness ratings. So someone this year who's rated highly effective will not be eligible for layoff over someone who was only rated effective. Same, someone who's effective will not be laid off before someone who's rated minimally effective. Then we also added some additional items that are in the law that you can use as factors when considering whether or not someone would either be placed or laid off. And those include the teacher's disciplinary record, teacher's attendance, and recency of service in the position, meaning someone who has taught 5th grade in the last several years may have priority over someone who has not taught 5th grade in the last 10 years, even if they're certified, but the only opening you have is a 5th grade opening. So that's kind of high level on the board policy side. I don't know if you have any comments on that, Dr. Bishop, or anything else that came up with respect to those conversations with the teachers.
No.
Okay.
So, John, can I ask you into questions now or at the end?
Yeah, conversation.
So, assuming you have 2 teachers that are both highly effective rated,
Yep.
Then the deciding factor then is what?
So
Is number of years of service?
it doesn't automatically go to number of years of service. It can be a combination of things. So let's say both teachers are rated effective, but one teacher received an actual formal discipline in the past year and the other didn't.
Okay.
So Dr. Bishop and his team would lay off the person who had a formal discipline before the individual who did not have formal discipline.
Okay.
Similarly, if you had someone who neither had discipline, but one of the teachers actually had so many days off in attendance that they actually had went into pay doc. Dr. Bishop and his team could lay off an individual who was in pay doc prior to another individual, even though they both are rated effective. And I don't know if you go into those factors in more detail.
Yeah, no, absolutely. That's great. When we talk about somebody who's went into a status within their attendance that would negatively impact kids, we're not talking about somebody who's on an FMLA leave or someone who is out for COVID. All those things are subtracted from a teacher's balance and does not, negatively hurt them at all. Like, we do want to have teachers who are in front of our kids, who are best supporting them. And sometimes absences do come into play with some of our students not being best supported. So that would be a factor that we could look at when it comes to which teacher should be placed where.
Thank you.
The other piece that you'll see at the about 2/3 down on that page is it says a teacher who's received an end-of-year performance review rating of ineffective, and then it says or needing support after July 1. So the revised school code has been amended such that the term ineffective is being removed as of July 1, and the term needing support is going in. So you'll see that throughout the document. So just high level, currently for this year and going back to 2011, the revised school code stated, and still does state until July 1st, that you have 4 evaluation rating categories. Highly effective is the highest, effective, minimally effective, and ineffective. You have 4 ratings categories. Moving forward after July 1st, there will be 3 ratings categories. They'll be effective, developing, and needing support. So all of your guidelines need to be adjusted for those particular categories and going from 4 down to 3.
Is that something you're doing for us?
So they've been reflected in this policy, and then we don't have evaluation updates within this because the law regarding evaluation is not actually going to affect until July 1st. So you'll continue to use the same evaluation performance system that you use in previous years in this school year. Next year you'll have a amended or updated based on those updated evaluation rating categories. With that being said, that is also now a mandatory topic of bargaining. So we will be bargaining that issue with the teachers this spring. And I don't know if they've raised that particular topic at all with you.
No, they have not yet. We just add one more layer to it. So we use the Charlotte Danielson model as far as the framework when we use to evaluate teachers. So we'll have to work with them to get an updated framework based upon the policies that are changing as well. So that way our teachers union can look at it, review it, and make sure it still meets our needs.
So Danielson's coming up with a new version?
They would have to.
Okay.
Because, I mean, the version which we have now would no longer be applicable.
Useless. Okay.
Correct.
Got it. Thank you.
So at the bottom of the page it says AG 5.14 at the bottom of page 1. So this is the administrative guideline. So this goes through and talks in more detail about what placement actually means. And that means including the filling of vacancies, which can either be voluntary or involuntary transfers, job sharing, and other decisions involving the placement of certified teachers. The only additions we have on page 2 where we also included that the term teacher, the definition of it includes the term as defined in section 1249 of the revised school code, because that term is now going to be defined in that section of the revised school code. We also took out references to highly qualified teachers. That is a term of art from the No Child Left Behind Act that was put in the law back in 2001. That has since been repealed, so the term highly qualified does not apply anymore. So that's just some language cleanup.
I'm sorry, John.
Yeah, no, you're fine.
When I read that, then it says, shall not be limited to state and federal requirements, comma, certification, comma, requirements, comma.
No, I think it's just certification requirements.
Correct.
Oh, I see what this is, so the comma's gone. I got it. Okay, thank you. No problem. Thanks, Will.
Yep.
So on the next page, about a third of the way down, gets into teacher layoff and recall. And it talks of,
Can we go back real quick, just the, I guess which page is it? It is the back of the second piece of paper, so the 4th or 5th page, I guess.
Have you gotten it?
Not there yet.
He's not there yet.
Oh, I apologize. I'm sorry.
We'll get there though.
I saw the red, and I thought we were jumping here. My fault.
no, you're okay. So under teacher layoff and recall, again, just staying within the concept of making amendments that only are needed to comply with the law at this point because we will be bargaining these issues. When we talk about the order of layoff and recall, what criteria will be used, paragraph A talks about the teacher's individual performance, which will be the majority factor. So that's performance based on their rating on the annual year-end performance evaluation. And then that includes, number 1 says evidence of student growth. Previously it said which shall be the predominant factor. The law no longer allows that to be the predominant factor, and student growth will go down from 40% of the overall evaluation rating to 20% next year moving forward. So that's why that is removed in that section. On the next page, the only thing that we have is that our amendments are updated references for needing support after July 1st of 2024, and then wherever it said minimally effective, changing that to or developing after July 1 of 2024, and then removing the highly qualified language.
What is the unique certification and/or endorsement status? What's the endorsement status?
Yeah, so within your certifications, you can have endorsements. So, you could be science certified, but then have specific endorsements within science.
Okay.
And I don't know if you have any more
Yeah,
details.
so like you think about like your biology, or if you have like a certain math that you're, highly qualified in, like it could be algebra, geometry, trig. Some of those things will come into consideration, especially if you're teaching AP classes.
Got it. Understood.
Next page, again, is all just cleanup for needing support or developing, and removing highly qualified. The other thing then we added was in number 7 towards the bottom. It talks about length of service or tenure status shall not be factors in considering the effectiveness of each teacher. And then it goes into, however, if you have 2 or more teachers and all other effectiveness factors distinguishing those are equal, it currently states then tenure status may be considered, and the law now states that tenure status or length of service, because you could have 2 probationary teachers, so tenure status wouldn't be implicated, but one could be 4 years in, one could only be 3 years in, so length of service, then probationary period comes into effect.
Yeah, one thing real quick under D, you switched when you go to section B1 to putting needing support, you're capping that and putting it in quotes.
Yep.
And in the prior section under D, you didn't do that, you didn't capitalize it, just for consistency's sake.
So there's capitalized that right there.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, and same with developing,
Okay.
just if you want to keep it consistent.
Yep.
And then in item B3, you missed the double quotes on developing.
Oh, okay. Okay. So on the next page, you'll see at the top of the page, it talks about, this is getting into what's in the contents of a personnel file. Again, here we're just amending to remove the references to highly qualified status. The next section is notification of layoff. There wasn't anything that was required by law to be changed there as far as timelines for notice of layoff. The next section, it previously stated termination. We just clarified that this is termination of contract during layoff. And what this is really stating is that when an individual is laid off, the district doesn't have any obligation for salary or fringe benefits during that layoff period. On to the next page, I'm getting into recall criteria. So we have a couple of strike-throughs here. So a teacher is eligible, I'm just reading real quick the very first sentence. The teacher is eligible to be considered for recall to a vacant position if the teacher is certified and qualified to fill a position as determined and defined by the district. And it said, and has not been rated ineffective on their most recent evaluation. An individual who's rated as ineffective is still eligible for recall. So we struck that language because technically that language is illegal. An individual who's rated ineffective still can be eligible for recall. In the next paragraph, there was a reference to Board Policy 3130. That is an old reference to a board policy that you used to have before you had your new policy book that you have now. So we are referencing Board Policy 5.14. And then there was language in this paragraph that stated that when filling positions, the district, what it stated was, may conduct interviews of both laid-off teachers as well as prospective teachers not currently employed by the district. The district may select a teacher not currently employed by the district or on layoff to fill a position if this decision would best serve students. That again potentially runs afoul of the Teacher Tenure Act. So what this language means that is now being struck is that if you had a teacher who had 20 years in your district and was rated minimally effective and laid off, administration could actually conduct interviews of someone who was brand new off the street and that minimally effective teacher and hire the person off the street, never taught in the district before, as opposed to that 20-year minimally effective teacher. Our firm's opinion is you're going to run into all kinds of tenure implications there because that teacher has tenure rights and you're effectively terminating their position without providing them the right to appeal that decision to the Teacher Tenure Commission. So that's why we struck that language, because we believe you're going to run into potential liability issues with that. And my understanding is it was never used before.
Yeah, at least in my time, we have never used that as far as part of our process.
And then onto the next page at the bottom, again, there's strikeout starting with the teacher tiebreaker procedure for teacher layoff and recall. And this was all language that provided a point system for additional considerations when having tiebreakers in the layoff and recall procedure, which was one of the concerns raised by the teachers union with Dr. Bishop, and something we talked about removing because it's not required by the law. And potentially ties your hands in administration a little bit where you can't necessarily always be looking at the effectiveness or what may be the best interest of the students if someone who's had the ability to do some more professional development because of their years of service in the district had more points than someone else. And I don't know if you have anything else on that.
Yeah, no, it's through our conversation that we've been having, especially with the union. Like some of these things, when you think about it, depending on when you came into the district, like if you are, let's say, a newer teacher coming to our district, it really wasn't attractive as far as bullet point number B, where it says relevant training within the last 3 years. Well, if you haven't had 3 years of service yet and you get 2 points for having all 3 years, you kind of were penalized if you were new coming to the district or you were new into teaching. So we were looking for certain things that wouldn't penalize teachers and get us back to looking at a holistic view, especially depending on the evaluation of teachers. So these are things in which we've had multiple conversations on with the union where, we were looking at a different way of how to be able to get this accomplished without having this tiebreaker point system that sometimes became very contentious.
Yeah, and I want to thank Dr. Bishop for working with the GPEA on this to make a AG and a policy more favorable to both sides. And I think that really does show with taking away this point system.
Appreciate that. Thank you.
Are there any questions on the policy?
I have a question just because I apologize for my tardiness. I had a meeting that ran long and then we had some traffic. Relative to the policy itself, the new language in red on the first page, I didn't have a chance to look at the any updates to the law. In items C, is that the language from the statute, or is that did we put that language together?
Yeah, so right now, what the statute states is there are a number of things that go into a determination regarding effectiveness and potentially layoff and recall. And it's the performance evaluation system, then it talks about a teacher's disciplinary record, attendance, significant relevant accomplishments, and relevant specialized training. The disciplinary record and attendance previously in Grosse Pointe was addressed in the point system in the back.
Right.
So that's being completely removed. However, those can still be factors that are considered. The law just says teacher's attendance. It doesn't state the rest of it, which says which is not otherwise protected leave pursuant to state or federal law. That's other language that you have throughout your policy as well to ensure that someone who's taken a maternity leave or FMLA leave isn't penalized for those things that they are legally entitled to take.
So from the point system, I understand, if you go back to what's been crossed out in item D on the last page, FMLA, workers' comp, hospitalization, serious extended illness, are items like funeral for immediate family member, approved school business, professional development going to be included in item C by default, or should it be spelled out that there's other items? I guess I'm not familiar with what the state law covers as far as everything that was in the point system. And then what comes to mind is, either a teacher that's also coaching a team, right? And so they're out of the classroom because they're coaching, or a teacher that is going on to get a special certification or endorsement and needs to be gone for a period of time. How is that taken into consideration with C now that it's out of the point system?
Sure, and so when we were going through and updating this, we considered just listing things like it was in the point system. But then there starts to be things that aren't necessarily in this. So Michigan now has a new paid medical leave act that wasn't included in the list, right? That would now be covered under this broader language.
Right.
One thing that we could potentially, what you're talking about isn't necessarily things like on the athletic coaching and funeral leave was listed, but we could potentially talk about all leaves that are governed by the collective bargaining agreement, which our office would state if there's leaves that are bargained for in your contract, you can't then penalize someone for taking those specific leaves, right? So the idea is that individuals who've exceeded their leaves and or through the contract or otherwise are potentially could have someone else take their position if effectiveness ratings are equal. But that was the idea, was to have a broad umbrella stating state or federal law so that if new laws come into effect, again, like the Michigan Paid Medical Leave Act, and it's not listed, then all of a sudden someone could say, well, that's not covered here. So
I don't really have a concern about the state or federal law portion, just the fact that there may be other stuff that isn't covered under state or federal law that we would want excluded. What comes to mind is professional development and sports, and maybe, I don't know, there's other things that I could rattle off, but.
Yeah, and those are good. But just so you know, like from kind of a practical point, we consider those to be approved leaves. So like things like that, people aren't really. It's not a negative as far as someone who's getting professional development or is taking their team to go play somewhere. Like all those things are already kind of like pre-approved to begin with. So those wouldn't fall underneath here, and they never have. Just so you have that knowledge base.
So on the, and just on the back, it says approved school business was one of the items that was listed,
Right.
but now it's not.
Okay.
That's my only.
Yeah, and we could put, I mean,
I
an
don't know
amendment
that
would be
either.
just approved leaves in general, because, again, when I looked at that and just approved school, but it's limiting to some extent, because there's other leaves that are not listed back here, right? So maybe we could just be more general in that, because, again, our firm's legal advice to the district would be, if you're penalizing individuals for being on an approved leave,
Right.
then you're gonna have potentially other discriminatory issues that come up from a liability standpoint.
Right.
So I think putting just a broad, again, if we're talking about broader strokes, a broad statement on any approved leaves pursuant to the collective bargaining agreement or other board policies.
Yeah, I'm gonna support that because being clear is being kind, and we don't want it to be something in which our teachers feel like, any kind of way as a negative.
Right.
Will have a negative
Yeah.
impact, and then we don't want them to not take advantage of professional development or supporting our
Right.
teachers. Supporting our students by being a coach. We don't want that. So if that is one piece where we can clear up, where it can be a little bit clear for teachers, let's do it.
That was just one of the first things that popped out at me, so.
Good catch, Will.
So how would we have that read? Because the way I read it is the teacher's attendance, which is not otherwise protected leave pursuant to state or federal law, is that teacher's attendance would, I would imagine we're talking about not approved attendance. And so,
Yeah, this just, just adding to that, so the teacher's attendance, which is not otherwise protected leave pursuant to state or federal law, or approved leave pursuant to a collective bargaining agreement or board policy.
see that. What do you think, Dr. Bishop?
I'm okay with that.
All right, so we'll add that. And I think
You didn't ask Mike if he was okay with it.
silence is always acceptance. And so I think the real thing that we were looking at here with getting rid of the point system was that this was not taking into account the teacher's time in the classroom. And that's what we really wanted to bring is, and the overall policy was to make sure that we were appropriately laying off and recalling based on the actual performance. And a lot of these factors with the point system was about things that were not in the classroom. Is that correct, Dr. Bishop?
That's definitely correct. And one of the things, especially when I talk about here on the last page here within the point system where it says significant relevant accomplishments and contributions, that's actually a document that I'm still working on now because point E and F on the first page used to have an appendix document that went along with what those things were. But some of those things were really highly reliant on what a teacher would do outside of the school day. And we want to focus on what they're doing with their kids because you could be a teacher and you could be in a different season. You could be a season in which maybe you just potentially had kids and you're coming off of leave and maybe you weren't able to have PD that summer. And then we don't want that to have to penalize somebody based upon this. So yes, we took that into consideration. We don't want it to be punitive. We want to make sure we have the best teachers in front of us, but we really want to rely on what our teachers are doing inside of the school day with students, the impact that they're having, and then make sure we're using that as a basis for our decisions.
Okay, are there any other comments from committee members on this policy or AG?
No.
All right, so we'll work with the administration to just get that sentence perfect.
Yep.
And with that change, I'm looking for a motion to approve both this policy and this AG for recommendation by the policy committee to the board.
So moved. Support.
Is that Mike?
Yes.
All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. Okay, new business. We may not have a meeting in February. I will get that information to everybody as soon as possible. I think we're gonna have a comprehensive look at the manual with changes from the resolutions that we brought throughout the year, as well as maybe some things being brought forward by the administration to look at a meeting in March. But I will have that information as soon as possible.
Sean, I'm sorry, I do have one question for John, if
Okay?
I could. So, with this being done, John, assuming we're gonna vote on this next week, that's
Yes,
the goal, February 6th.
February 6th.
Is there anything else para-related that we need to deal with, or is this it?
So, the other items I mentioned, so your discipline currently still complies with the law, staff disciplines, still have arbitrary capricious, which is in the Teacher Tenure Act, so you're okay with that. Your evaluation administrative regulation, will need to be updated for next school year. However, we're bargaining this school year, so again, from just a standpoint of the question of what legally needs to be changed right now,
Yeah.
these were the items, because you're gonna have teacher placement and layoff and recall before the end of the school year, and potentially before a collective bargaining agreement is reached. If a collective bargaining agreement is not reached by the time we would be doing evaluations next year, that would be a year and a half from now. So, those are the main, and then merit pay is something that's a bargainable topic too, which, again, we don't need to, there's nothing that's, you have in place now that's not legally compliant.
Got it, thank you.
All right, do we have any public comments? No? Any committee member
I'll hold the
comments?
camera and film you.
Committee member comments?
None.
No? All right, with that, we stand adjourned.
Thank you, John.